Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with Ivan Osaretz at the table. And we have three guests, two oldie goldies because they're old. David Anderson and Richard Hernandez. My math, I think I've known them 39 years. Our next guest is Clayton Stanley, 44 years. And this is a happy birthday podcast to Clayton. Clayton's turned 50. Let me ask all three of you. Clayton, do you feel old?
I'm still young at heart, but yeah, slowly the body reminds me that I'm 50 years old, especially after I go out and play tennis on occasion.
How about David? Clayton turning 50. Does it make you feel old?
No, not really. The last time we hit balls, I felt like I was 20 years younger than Clayton. So I figure, I'm rounding towards 30 right now if he's turning 50.
Clayton, I saw him a couple months ago in San Antonio. He came out, spoke to a group. We had a large group at the Blossom Tennis Center. We watched Texas play TCU, Clayton's alma mater. I think it was 4-3. What was the score? You remember, Clayton?
Yeah, it came down to the third set when Texas lost 4-3 in the final.
Yeah, and then we went out to dinner. He certainly looks a lot younger than you, David. He's still got good hair. You have any gray hairs, Clayton?
Yeah, they're starting the beard and the sideburns are where they're mainly coming in, and the hair's starting to recede a little bit on top. But I still have infinitely more than Dave does.
I only grow hair.
If you have one, you have infinitely more hair than me.
I can only grow hair out of my nose and my ears. How about you, Richard? How do you feel with the one and only Clayton Stanley turning 50?
Depends on which side of the bed I roll out of. Some days I'm good, some days I'm good. But in the end, I would say I feel pretty good most days. Most days I feel pretty good.
For our listeners, Clayton heard Mary Carrillo say this about Jimmy Connors. He may not be the most accomplished player, but he's the most important. I think with Clayton, we'll get into it, he's a very accomplished player, having played at Texas. But for me, I would say Clayton as a student was of great significance. I was 26, Clayton was 6, and it was my first weekend in Tyler, Texas at this junior college. And Clayton and his family just lived really just like say a mile and a half away, maybe less. And his father, David, was hitting the ball machine. And I went up and said, "Hey, if you want me to help you out with any of your strokes, I'll be glad to help you out." He was on the Tyler Junior College tennis courts. And I gave him a lesson. I remember he insisted on paying me. Then he talked to me and said, "I've got a son who I'd like to have become a tennis player." And so right away, 26, I was there to build a tennis teaching program. But Clayton became a project, and he really helped out because, he was taught very well from the very beginning. So I met Clayton several years before you two guys. You guys both came in 85, right? Clayton's born in 74. So yeah. I was 6. I mean, where were you when you met? Let's go with Richard first. When you first met Clayton.
So I was at Gladewater, filling in for Gabriel Matos. Gabriel had gone back on the tour to play, and I was running some events at Gladewater, and Clayton came out to play, and I was so impressed. I was looking around who had accompanied him, who brought him to the tournament, and I sat down next to you, Steve, and I said, "You work with this kid?" He goes, "Yes," because I was so impressed with Clayton's ball striking. And that's when you introduced yourself and the work you were doing at TJC Tennis Tech. And it was on I think a Sunday. And I was at TJC to observe the program Monday morning. I was so impressed.
Yeah, for our listeners.
Clayton must have been about 11 or 12.
For our listeners, Gladewater is a small town outside of Tyler, Texas. It's a good sized place. The University of Texas at Tyler Junior College. I think when we were there, it was like 75,000 people. How about you, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, right around that 85 period, and Clayton, whenever I think of Clayton, I think of not only him, but Lissa Kimmel, Timmy Hurst, Julie Scott, and that crew. And, Clayton, you caused me a lot of grief for one particular reason, because when I was, making millions working as an intern for Steve or whatever my role was there, he gave me it was called the White Mice. You guys were the White Mice. You were a lab project.
The guinea pigs.
And for all the guinea pigs, yeah. And so I was supposed to get pictures of you guys in still shots. Now back then, it wasn't like a cell phone was there and you could, it had to be with a camera, and I had no skill in anything. And to this day, I need to go to San Antonio and track all of you guys down and get your backswings in still shots and complete that project, because I never got it done. And every Monday morning I had anxiety getting into Tennis Tech at 5 a.m. into that office, because I knew I was going to get called to the carpet on that White Mice. But I remember, the thing is that when I think of you, Clayton, I always, you had energy. And in my lifetime of coaching, it's always easier to tame the tiger than wake the dead. And, you always seem to have energy and enthusiasm. And those are qualities that can take people a long way.
With, tennis, certainly Gabriel Matos.
That's the last compliment of the day, by the way.
Gabriel Matos, who Richard mentioned, Brazilian, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. But he was a good player. But I would say for the most part, the tennis scene for juniors was very local. I mean, it was a small East Texas city, but Tyler Junior College, initially it was all American kids, but they weren't being as competitive as they like it. Then they switched. It was really like an international hub. There was very good tennis players, and I believe it's still the same way to this day at Tyler Junior College.
Even UT Tyler, now that they've got a few. They did well this year in Division II. They made it to the Final Eight for the first time in the history of the program since switching from NAI.
But I would say for our listeners, try to bring value to this podcast. I would say with Clayton, from age 6 to age 16, I pretty much knew what he was doing every day. And Clayton, you were very social, and I remember, arranging, say, a visit where a legendary tennis teacher like a Vic Braden would be in town, and Clayton was going to come over and take a half-hour lesson from Vic while everybody was watching. But your mother Marilyn, she made sure that you got to the birthday parties and you had normalcy. Your two brothers, Lawrence and Jordan, I don't think they had someone stalking them like I was for you, right?
No, definitely not. They did more of the team sports. They never really got into tennis too much. But
no, you became an athlete. You played. I mean, you were a really good basketball player. But with David, he was just a great tennis parent. When it comes down to, we became great friends. And with Clayton's driveway, it's a slight incline up a decent sized driveway. But, he had the basketball hoop. I told David, you got to build your son a backboard. I mean, it seemed like 2 days later, he had a contractor over there. He had it made out of cinder block, and you had a really nice backboard. A lot of the kids, it's tough to do for some people because of HOA, if they're living in an apartment complex or condos, townhouses. But Clayton, do you remember when I brought Jim Verdick by to your house? You were so young for all that.
I do actually remember that. Yeah, and I definitely remember that. I got to do some short lessons with a lot of the legendary tennis coaches of the time. But I do remember him coming by the house.
For our listeners, actually another question I could ask you. We'll come back to that when you were at Texas. We'll get to that. I just found this the other day that Jeff Moore, who won a couple of national titles, he was the coach at Texas when you were, correct?
Yeah, Jeff was the women's coach when I was there.
Yeah, he was women's coach. He played for Jim Verdick Several people recommended to get him on the podcast, and I finally connected with him. And he goes, "Well, I had a great college coach." And I said, "Yeah, who was your coach?" Jim Verdick. So anyway, I brought Jim Verdick in, and I remember he was coming in for a weekend, and Clayton, he wasn't going to be able to make the workshop. He had a lot of activities, very young, but so I said, "All right, well, I'll make it happen. I'll bring Verdick on my way from the airport. Clayton will be home from after school." And it was just one of those things where your mother dropped you off, but she had to go run an errand, and your tennis bag was in her car. So you didn't have any rackets. And Coach Verdick always wore a stopwatch. And to this day, I ask kids, have you measured, 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters? But what Coach Verdick did, he had you in your your school clothes, but he had on a pair of sneakers, and he got the stopwatch out, and he marked off so many distances and said, "Okay, you got to have your personal best, and you got to do these periodically." But I just remember that was, just a really special moment with Coach Verdick. He still made it work. Let's go around the horn. Dave, why don't you go first? Why don't you ask Clayton the question?
Well, Clayton, in that having been in Dallas now for so long, and then the perception of people in Dallas, Houston, maybe even San Antonio, to some degree Austin, back when you were a junior in Tyler, even though Tyler, I think, was recognized as one of the top smaller town tennis cities in America back in that era. Did you feel when you traveled to what were then major zones and or nationals, did you feel that you were at a disadvantage in any way in terms of exposure that you might have felt you were missing from some of the kids from the bigger metropolitan areas?
I don't think so, especially in my younger years, because, obviously, like, I was always able to practice with, older people that were, better than me, obviously, and which I think is important. I mean, one thing that like was good for me going to Texas, I feel like you don't necessarily ever want to be the best person in the group of people you're playing with, because I think you're going to regress to the mean because you're not really going to be challenged. So like there were a lot of good older, lots of college tennis players came out of Tyler, that were a little bit older than me, so, and the point, my freshman year on the high school tennis team, Tyler Lee had one of the top, high school tennis programs that won several state championships. I didn't make the top 6. I was the number 7 player my freshman year. And then, ended up winning a few state championships, as I got older. But, and the other thing was good too is, Dave, this involves you, for guys that were, at TJC, were playing on the tennis team and things like that. So I had exposure to like, not just, good junior players, but also college players. And then even, going over to Longview on weekends to, practice with one of your players, Chad Clark, who, was my teammate at Texas, and, was, number 1 player in college tennis for a while. So I played quite, I traveled and played a lot of tennis, tournaments, in juniors. So I think it affected me a little bit later, as I, got a little older. One thing y'all mentioned, some of the college programs. One thing that I really enjoyed the team aspect of high school and college tennis. So, I played on my high school team the whole way through, but I made a deal with my high school tennis coach, especially my senior year, where I didn't really have any, junior players to play with that could challenge me. So I actually didn't practice with the team. I knew Don Peterson at TJC, who was the coach at the time. They were the top in JCA, team, and then also, UT Tyler. I would alternate going out and practicing with the TJC teams and the UT Tyler team, kind of my senior year, just to kind of stay sharp and stuff. So I think you had to be somewhat creative, where you weren't in a big city where there was, lots of highly ranked juniors and stuff like that. But I made it work, and but I think that is one advantage. I mean, to be in a big city like Dallas, where you can there's lots of nationally ranked juniors and, players at all levels. So I think, you just got to find a way to play with adults, or, always find people to play with that are a little bit better than you, so you can challenge yourself.
One thing before going to Richard, I remember, I was 26, and when you're 26 years old, you haven't really developed any players. By the time I arrived in Tyler with the mission to develop that tennis teaching program, I had been trained by WBY Van Horn, Dennis Vandermeer, and Vic Braden. So I had exposure, I had education experience, but I remember people saying that you could not compete. Kids in Tyler, Texas could not compete with kids from Dallas. And for our listeners, they're like 100 miles apart. So Dallas was certainly, Houston and some of the other big cities were part of the Texas equation for sure, but it would be kids from Tyler can't play with kids from Dallas. And I'm not buying that. What is the air different? There's so many reasons that, the kids from Tyler are guinea pigs from Tyler, then later the neighboring town, Longview, stepped it up and proved that they could compete with the kids from Dallas. With Richard, go ahead.
So, Clayton, tell me, because I really never knew the relationship that you had with Steve. Steve said from age 6. And that's by the time I knew you, you were 11, maybe 12. That's 6 years. So in that time frame, you developed an incredible skill set. What I observed when I first saw you. But tell me if the relationship with Steve was through your father, the parent, or did you have the direct coach-player relationship? Do you follow my question? In other words, was your dad an interpreter, what Steve was saying, or was it very direct towards you?
No, it was, other than my dad, who, at that time, so I guess when I was 6, we're talking, 1980, where, tennis was very big in the U.S. at the time, with the, McEnroe and Connors era and things like that. So my dad was just a recreational player that enjoyed. So he I think wanted to introduce me to tennis. My dad, and I think Steve would, my dad was a good tennis parent because he allowed, he knew he wasn't an expert in tennis. And so he, allowed Steve, he knew Steve was. So, Steve kind of made all the decisions, and my dad wasn't, second guessing things, based on results. So, and my dad worked very hard and spent a lot of hours at work. So, other than my dad setting up the introduction of like, hey, Steve, I want you to, coach my son. From that period of time Steve talks about from 6 to 16, not counting hours that I was sleeping in bed at my house, I spent more time with, Steve and the people in the tennis tech program at the time, and Tennis Connection, which is what they were called at the time, than my own, than my parents, right? Because I was practicing, 7 days a week and stuff. So no, it was very direct between, myself and Steve, and I'm sure, just like a relationship with a son to a father. I would, I'd get frustrated at times and things like that. No, but we, Steve was my first coach, and really the only coach I ever had until he kind of moved away from Tyler later in my junior career.
I do think with the listeners, so WBY Van Horn, for example, how did he develop? He's another one of our pillars. People listening for the first time, Jim Verdick is one of our pillars, and you can go back and listen about WBY Van Horn, or listen about the career of the contributions of Jim Verdick. But with Welby, his first 3 lessons, you basically want to hit a tennis ball, but out of the corner of his right eye, you'd give half-hour privates. You'd have to hit the backboard 30 minutes before your lesson started. Then after your lesson was over, you'd stand in front of his pro shop window it wasn't fair for women back then, for girls, but if, say he was helping you with your low backhand volley, you would shadow swing that low backhand volley in the pro shop window for 30 minutes. And then if you weren't doing it to his liking, he'd whack a tennis ball at you. So I think another thing with Welby is he worked at the Caribbean Hilton Hotel, and he had all sorts of matches for people to play, hotel guests. And then it was a fun thing too, where they would wager. The kids would be on, Welby would get the hotel guests, and hey, I'll bet this 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid can beat you. But I think with Clayton, especially by the time you guys showed up in 1985, Tennis Tech got to the point where it had enrollment of over 100 students. And you two both played at a level where you wouldn't have been asked to play Clayton until it was a little further down the road. So when he was 9, we would have, we had all sorts of levels of players in that enrollment of 100. So it was a very good formula to have a backboard and, coming out and doing all the technical exercises. Another thing too is Clayton was the first guinea pig, as David mentioned some of the other names, is Clayton took lessons in front of a crowd, in front of an audience, and like those Tuesday, Thursday nights. Obviously, he wouldn't be there for morning lab because he was in regular school. Homeschool wasn't really part of the formula. But, it was almost like they were on stage where people, they're taking a lesson in one of the stations. There's several stations, but Clayton or one of his contemporaries might have been on, court 3 in front of the bleachers, and they're working on volley drills, and the Tennis Tech students are writing down what the drills were. So it was a pretty unique, decade of tennis through the 80s in Tyler. Go ahead, David, your turn.
Do you want me to comment or make a question for our guest of honor, Mr. Clayton Stanley, now turning 50 shortly?
You could chirp him a little bit. I think he can handle it. Before we got on the air, I thought he was ahead, don't you, Richard? I think Clayton was getting the best of Anderson.
Well, one thing I always liked about Clayton, as we got to spend time together, Clayton, when you lived here in Dallas, I thought, that your willingness and desire to actually come out and jump in and, whether it was going through 3 zone or just hitting inside with, just totally spontaneous hits with some of the kids. I think it was evident that, you had a passion for the game. I've seen too many players, especially those, you were a very good 12 and under player and had a lot of success early on. And I see them lose their passion, not only in their life for tennis, but, oftentimes even in the middle of college. We have a UT guy that was on the NCAA championship team, a Texas kid. If you remember Peter Marcus, do you remember him? His son, yep. Colin. Yeah. So Colin is helping out here at the club now, and he was talking to the kids last week, and he said he wouldn't invest too much time and energy into a lot of travel and putting too much into the junior tennis scene. He said, from his perspective, I only played major zones and then really the true nationals, hard courts, clays, and indoors, I believe it was. And he said that even on his championship team, as he was in his years at Texas, that there were so many players that had vested so much in it and had a lot of early on success, and their passion tank was pretty much done by sophomore, junior year in college. And they still worked hard and trained, but the desire wasn't there. So what do you think, has been key for you to keep the passion, still want to hit balls through most of your life? You still haven't gone to the dark side and picked up a pickleball paddle, really. What do you think's been the key to that?
A few things. One, as I've, I'm turning 50 here in a couple weeks. So, as far as still having the, passion and going and, talking to juniors or hitting with them, for one, it's great exercise, right? And and it's a lot more fun than going for a jog for me, right? So, that's the great thing about tennis is that, being a lifetime sport is, it's, good exercise is something you can do your your whole life, and I agree with what Colin was saying on, the kind of, juniors can get burned out at an early, an early age. I think too, I think if I was doing it, again, I would want to, follow a similar path. Obviously you have to play enough to, to get the points and the rating, and that's changed over the years. But as far as to get access to the tournament, where, you can get, have the college coaches see you, if that's kind of the level of tennis you're at and what you're wanting to do. But, one thing that really like helped me, too, was like, college tennis kind of even reinvigorated me. I really enjoy, tennis being can be a little bit in isolation. That's the great thing about tennis is you're accountable because it's an individual sport. So there's no one to, blame the results on other than looking in the mirror. But, the team aspect of it is very fun. So that was, one thing that I really enjoyed, about college tennis was the team aspect about it, and, going and practicing hard and, having other teammates that are, relying on you, and you're kind of all going after a common goal.
Do you play on any USTA adult league teams like 5-0 or open stuff?
I do. Yeah. I did a little bit in Dallas, played in open teams. And then in San Antonio, there's actually, some, several ex-college players. So I have been playing some, 5-0 and open team tennis stuff. So that's been fun too. Just playing when I'm, I hit a decent amount and do some drills, but then I'm playing doubles typically when I'm playing the USTA league stuff, which is fun.
Good.
With Richard, let me just throw this in before I ask you what your question is. Clayton, how tall are you?
5'9".
Yeah, so you're like me. How's it go, Rudy? 5 foot nothing, 100 nothing. But I do think that after the 12s,
he wasn't 100 nothing, Steve. The last time I saw him, he had a little something hanging around his top of his shorts.
Is that Clayton? Is that right? You're talking about me?
No, Clayton.
Clayton, a few of those.
Clayton he had a little cushion hanging around him. So I don't know that he's 100 nothing anymore.
But I remember being in a restaurant, and your mother was so nice, so polite. She must have thought I was crazy. So I met your grandmother, and she was very short. And so you weren't a big guy. But the point is that you grew late too. I mean, you were small for a long time.
I think I think when I entered high school, I was barely above 5 feet. So yeah, then I got to like 5'9" by the end of high school. So yeah, a lot of my growth was in high school.
No, for our listeners, so Clayton not making the lineup as a freshman, that had a lot to do with his size. I'm sure if you start rattling off the names of the people who were playing ahead of you, I'm sure I coached a few of those players, and your skill set, would have been better. That I always say that's brawn versus brain. We put people through skills tests, and many times, the 18-year-old is going to play the 13-year-old and win in the match. But when you start to say, okay, let's see who can hit targets. But yeah, that's where you had more success. By the time you were junior and senior, you won, and that was something else we could talk about, how important high school tennis was. Everybody played back in the day. But go ahead, Richard.
So Clayton, this question it's going to be directed at you, but obviously it's for young adults, young players in mind. So I do remember, and what struck me about you was that you were very much an extrovert. You would introduce yourself to other people. You talked a lot to other people, but mostly I thought you were very inquisitive. Like you always wanted to know, no subject matter. You wanted to know, but specifically about, tennis, and you discussed a lot, especially when I was around you, a lot to do with tennis. Tell me, about that. Tell me how that might have helped you. You always took an interest in, results and how people played, and strengths and weaknesses. How did you grow that sort of, that inclination to be, inquisitive like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really at a young age. My dad used to call me Questions as a nickname, because I would wear my dad out asking questions about everything. But I was always very very curious about everything. I wanted to know, how something works or why that's the right answer, right? So I just kind of the way that that I've always been, whether it relates to tennis strategy or just kind of anything, right? Like, I mean, if I was going to Canada to watch a hockey game, I would want to know all, being a sport that at the time I didn't know much about, I'd want to know all the rules and why they're doing this and things like that. So I think it's all, I mean, it's just a good trait for people to have, to be like curious, intellectually, or about sport, to just always kind of I mean, it's a way to help kind of improve things, of just wanting to know the why, and even challenging stuff. Like, if someone tells you this is the right way to do it, you kind of want to understand what the why behind it.
Go ahead, David.
No, that's okay. I was just listening and thinking about Clayton's comments there, and a curious mind, lifelong learner is what I think of. I think it's a good way, and I think it helps breed accountability too. You feel like you're gathering as much as you can along the way to kind of navigate your own ship. I think that's a great quality.
I do think that he met so many people, and whether it was during the year or I know that Clayton and a few others, they went to the camp where they stayed overnight, and they were very experienced players in a camp of recreational players. But I think back in the day, I think playing high school tennis, being around high school football, high school basketball, I do think that the book Range, a specialist versus a generalist, it just seems today where it's so different, where kids are not playing high school tennis, they're not around other athletes. It's pretty much a one track mentality.
Yeah, and that changed here, Clayton, in Texas. What you used to be allowed to do, where you could kind of bypass the high school practice if you were an exceptional player, and that was the case when I moved to the city here 31 years ago on October 11th, and but it changed about 15 plus years ago. The UIL really kind of buckled down on it. So now, without exception, the high school coaches, I think because of legalities, they have to keep the people on the high school campus until the actual end of practice. So it's forced a lot of kids to make a decision that I think isn't a great one, where they either, have to say yes or no to it. If there was a player like at your level, and a lot of the ones at your level are opting out of team, high school play as a result of it.
My recollection on that, Clayton, is the last period of the day, all the varsity players, that was your practice, and that was also your PE credit. So I thought the positive was that with that is that you got together as a team, but you're only there for 45 minutes, and then you can go off to your private practice. What's your recollection of that?
Yeah, that's kind of how it worked at the time. So I would often kind of stay for maybe some of that. Granted, they didn't. I don't think it was enforced as much. But then, and most tennis players, weren't just relying on that 45 minutes to be their only tennis. They would then go to their drill session with their junior program, or at that point, that's when I would drive over to Tyler Junior College or UT Tyler to go practice with the college teams, and just because they were practicing at a similar time. But yeah, Dave, I wasn't aware of that rule. That makes sense too, because I agree. If it forces kids into making a tough decision if they feel like there's not somebody that that they can practice with that's going to help advance their game. If they have to stay there for the full time. But I agree that was more that was one of the things that, that makes sense now why there's less people playing high school tennis, and also all of the homeschooling that's going on now. I remember though, about that same time, people right kind of as I was ending my high school tennis, it was just starting. There was also about the UIL was cracking down on the sponsorship, where a lot of junior players were getting discounted or free rackets and clothes from the manufacturers, and they were like if they were becoming aware of that, they were like not allowing kids to play high school tennis, so that started to take some kids out of it as well.
Go ahead, Richard.
No, so Clayton, with your sort of, you said your high school years in Tyler, I need to understand, because I can't recall all of it, but when you say you wouldn't go to practice with the team, how many of the team would do similar to what you did in terms of just, attend a short spell of high school practice and then head off to either group or individual training? How many guys were on the team doing this?
Yeah, for me, it's a high, just because of the way that tennis was. Like, I think Steve kind of mentioned it too. The actual high school tennis practice was very short. Just during the period. And at that point, everyone was going. You remember where Robert E. Lee was located. It's now called Tyler Legacy, but Robert E. Lee High School. Everyone would go over to Tennis and Swim or Timber Creek to go, do their junior program. And at that point, I'd be driving the one to the college. I was the only one that was practicing with the college teams. And that was something that I worked out on my own with like Coach Peterson and I can't even remember who was the coach at UT Tyler at the time.
With the Jesuits, academically, they have an expression, I mention it often, just give us the first 7 years. So by the time you were 13, you had 7 years. You were going to be serving, volleying, and Clayton was a little extreme on the forehand grip, but the ball came up in the air. He could play the conventional approach volley. He just had a complete game by a very young age. Tell the listeners about Texas. Both your parents graduated from Texas. That from the very beginning, that was your goal, right? To play tennis at Texas.
Yes. I was a pretty diehard Longhorn. I even though I, had a successful, junior career and was able to, to play on the Texas tennis team, I think if I hadn't, I would have had a tough choice whether I was going to go to Texas and not play tennis, or if I would have chose to go another route. Lucky for me, and it worked out where I could. I initially walked on to the Tech. It was kind of like a recruited walk on, so I had a guaranteed spot on the team, but walked on the team, and then I eventually got I got some academic scholarships my first year, but then I eventually got, partial athletic scholarships, which is kind of the case, I don't think the scholarships have changed. With men's Division I tennis, where there's only 4.5 scholarships to spread across up to 10 people, that, you typically don't have, but maybe 1 or 2 guys on a full scholarship, but then everyone else is kind of splitting partial scholarships.
And you redshirted that first year?
I did. So I was there. I redshirted my freshman year. Then my redshirt for my freshman year, which would have been my second year, I played very sparingly. But then after that, then kind of my last 3 years of eligibility, I played, quite a bit. Not wasn't playing in every single match, but for most matches I was playing in, in either singles or doubles, and got to play, quite a bit. I probably had a little more success in doubles than in singles, but yeah, we had a good team. We won, won the conference, which was both the Southwest and the Big 12. Three of the 4 years of my eligibility, and then we got to the NCAA quarterfinals twice and lost in the round of 16 twice. So that was kind of how we did the 4 years I was there.
No, I remember, being from the Northeast, saying, well, why don't you apply to some of the Ivy League schools and this and that? And you were just so dead set on going to Texas. But you followed all the Texas sports too. I mean, like you were a big Texas fan, it was not just tennis, it was Texas everything. I remember being at the university with you and your dad and, after a match or the second match of the day, whenever you were done, I remember like going to catch a baseball game and just going to sporting events on the Texas campus, which was cool.
Yeah, and I still am a big season ticket holder for football, and we're ranked number 1 in the country in football right now. So it's a good time to be a Texas sports fan.
You sound like a tennis parent there.
With
you just said we're ranked number 1, like you're out there taking the snap.
I know. That's being an alumni. I get to say that.
I guess so. I didn't see your face behind that helmet.
So for our listeners, we were all the 4 of us. We were all on the same campus, knocking tennis balls around, trying to be a student of the game, and towards February, I used to call the program Resume Tech, and I actually have it laminated. Clayton, you would remember the athletic director's name. His last name was Dodds. And anyway, I applied to be the football coach at Texas. At that time, their budget was $8 million. And I'm going, for $8 million, like I said, I can hire the right people. I'll be able to coach this football team. But the whole point was I just wanted to get a rejection letter because I was trying to teach the tennis tech students, that's what we call the program, that it doesn't hurt to ask. Don't be afraid to be rejected. That
could have been a real life Ted Lasso story.
When it comes down to getting the right support staff, it's like the story of Tom Landry, who coached the Cowboys for so long, and then Vince Lombardi was with Green Bay. I know he spent a little bit of time with the Redskins, but they were both assistant coaches for the New York Giants, and they asked the head coach, with Landry and Lombardi as your 2 assistants, what do you do? He goes, I just read the newspaper. So I guess maybe I was thinking that I could become the head coach of Texas football and I would hire the right assistants. But no, I got my rejection letter. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, first of all, I'll let Clayton comment on you even thinking about applying as the Texas head coach. Go ahead, Clayton. Well, what's your thoughts on that?
I think we've had some dry spells over the years, so Steve could have gotten similar results and saved the university some money over the last few decades. But yeah,
our listeners have to realize back in those days, I went to work every day with a whistle because we had 100+ tennis tech students studying to be tennis teachers. We had PE students. And then on Tuesday and Thursday nights, we had as many as 80 people coming out for the dollar clinic. And then we had the guinea pigs. And we never really had more than, say, 10 guinea pigs. And it was, David had been there 3 years before he went to the neighboring town and was running 2 clubs and had autonomy. But it was, at one point, there was 4 clubs in Tyler and 2 in Longview. And we had a tennis influence at all but one facility, 5 out of 6. I remember one time in northern Germany that we had more of an influence in northern Germany than we did in East Texas. But that was very unusual with what say David did with 2 clubs. He had autonomy, but we were still all working together. It wasn't one club against another. And that expression, people on the same page, the tennis camp that Clayton and the fellow guinea pigs attended, basically that camp had a 9-month orientation. Most tennis camps don't even have 9 minutes, but people would train for 9 months, and not everyone stayed for the tennis camp. But I remember one student who came back to visit several years later, and he came to visit during the tennis camp, and his comment to me was, "This stuff really works." because they were just watching all. He came to visit. Several people did that. They would just come and visit for a week. I know I spent a better part of 8 years around David every day, where Richard, you were there for the couple of years, but you kept bringing students back to visit. And, but yeah, we used to always say that we thought the program was 2 years was too short. But yeah, the people that came and went during Clayton's time. With Clayton, I want to ask you, you remember where we got you to put on the Texas A&M clothes?
I do remember that. I think you must have had a photographer that could work a camera better than Dave Anderson, because I think you probably got a picture of that.
No, we got it done. That's right. I'm glad you got that dig on Anderson. I mean, we still have it. We had slides, and Laura Hanna, who I worked with, she played at Texas A&M, and during her time, there was a coaching change, and someone from the phys ed department started coaching the women's tennis team, and through that connection, I think it was 5 years running. I was telling Jeff Moore, who was coaching at Texas at the time, we were on campus when the Texas A&M girls beat the Texas girls in tennis, and it was like a big, big thing. But yeah, we did the do's and don'ts, and Clayton was wearing all these Texas long run clothes where you had on shoes that were, 15 sizes too big, and a sock on one foot, no sock on the other foot, the left shoe on the right foot, and and we went forehand volley, the do's and don'ts. And then he was wearing, back in the day, I'm sure you could still do it in a place like Tyler, Texas, is find a lot of people had, I need A&M clothes, I need Texas clothes. So we did a quick photo shoot, and I didn't know how exciting it would be, but on the Friday night when we went down, seriously, it was a huge auditorium. If it was one person in there, there's 300. It was just packed. It was mandatory for the PE students to take the evening part of the program. They didn't have to go on the Saturday, Sunday. And the Aggies were doing the slideshow, and they were just going crazy. The guys were standing up and doing that where they stamp their foot and swing in a circle. And then years later, craziness of tennis, I remember the local people really weren't supporting Vic Braden when he came to Tyler for like the fourth time. We used to bring him in every other year. So he came in just for a short visit in Tyler, then we loaded up the vans, and the whole program basically went to College Station. And Vic, who's a professional comedian, I said, "Hey, Vic, I got this do's and don'ts slideshow." I said, "All you got to do is, stand by the microphone and comment." And it was just amazing. But yeah, you were your parents were really, really good spirit about that. They didn't mind that we had you for one morning or one afternoon wearing Texas A&M clothes for a photo shoot.
I don't think I ever got any royalties from that.
I was on the A&M campus years later, because Steve Denton, they still haven't built an indoor center, and I was flattered that he wanted to have a learning center at Texas A&M and wanted me to spearhead that. So it's Kevin O'Shea still there as an assistant, and he's telling me all the problems with red tape on the athletic side, and I said, well, there's a lot of problems with red tape on the academic side. So we went to meet with an academic dean, and I have a copy of it. He wrote a small narrative, a storybook on our training of the A&M tennis teachers. But boy, the facilities have changed so much at A&M. But tell us about Texas tennis facilities. It was a big deal because that's where the high school championships used to be played. That facility no longer exists, right?
Yeah. So there was the tennis center was called Pinnock Allison Tennis Center. It was right kind of behind the UT basketball arena down the street from the football stadium, but it was named after the only two tennis coaches in UT tennis's history, Harvey Pinnock and Daniel Allison, until Coach Snyder, who he was the third coach, who was my coach when I was there. That they just recently, I shouldn't say recently, in the last 10 years, they tore down the tennis center to build the Dell Medical School. So now UT Austin has its own medical school, and it's right where the tennis center was. So they had to move it across the I-35. It's in between. It's right next to the baseball and the women's softball stadiums now. So it's actually a nicer facility, just kind of on the other side of the campus across I-35. But it took a while for it to get built because there was some changed athletic directors after DeLoss Dodds, who we mentioned earlier, and they wanted new money to be raised, even though UT already had a paid for tennis. So it took a while to get the fundraising in place to build a new tennis center. So for a while, the UT tennis team, and this was when they were, ranked in the top 5 in the country, they were playing out of just, some matches at the intramural court. They were playing some matches at Caswell Tennis Center. They were kind of nomads. Didn't have a home for a few years. So
now the indoor and the outdoor, they're several miles apart.
Yeah. And then we also built our indoor facility, which has 6 courts, is at the UT Golf Club. So it's about 20 miles away from campus. So the tennis center, the outdoor center, has 12 stadium courts, and then you've got six courts at the indoor center, which is at the UT Golf Club.
That's the one Steve Bryan's running, Clayton.
Steve Bryan is the director of tennis at the UT Tennis Club, which is at the UT Golf Club.
Yeah.
Richard, go ahead.
No, I mean, to Clayton, my questions aren't as personal, but certainly I hope you can provide some insight. So, would you describe Tyler as a small town, medium-sized town?
Yeah, I'd say medium-sized town. It's kind of like, once you kind of get, past all the big metro areas of the, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, Houston, San Antonio. And then there's kind of another level that's a little, then you have your Wacos and, and Abilene's and stuff like that. And, so it at the time when we were all there, the population was around 75,000. I'm guessing now it's probably around 100,000 now. But yeah, it's kind of a medium-sized Texas town.
Yeah. So my question is this: if you sort of had to describe, did you feel like the coaching you had was certainly something you appreciated at the time, or did it take some time for you to acquire the taste?
The one thing for me, I'd say I probably didn't necessarily appreciate it at a young age because this is lucky for me. This was the only coaching I had, right? So when Steve worked with me for the first time, I had never hit a tennis ball before, and I was 6 years old. So the good thing for me is I was like clay. You could just mold me into whatever you wanted because I didn't have any other ideas about what a tennis stroke should be. But over time, so I was with Steve the whole time. Over time, these other players that got added in that we named some of them later. Most of them had started somewhere else, and so there was some degree of them needing to make some technical changes to their strokes to make them more efficient to help improve their game. So I definitely appreciated that, in that I didn't have to go through that where people kind of had to realize that they may have to take one step back to take 2 steps forward. Steve, and there were some people that were resistant to that in Tyler, right? Some people that may have had some level of success in tennis, but, weren't willing to, make significant changes that would have helped improve their games in the long run because there would have been a short-term setback.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story. Julie Scott, she was somebody who had to rebuild her game. I remember Clayton saying one time if she had started a little bit sooner with us, because she never really conquered the serve like we would have liked her to. But Ferrari, I mean, just obviously such a great mover. How's it go? Mind, mechanics, and mobility. So she had the mind and the mobility. I think her mom, Gail, she did an amazing job as a tennis parent. But there's a gal, Nina Riner, and there was a Catholic school. And the one thing you asked about, to us, Tyler was certainly a small city because Dallas is an hour away, and that was massive. I mean, I go to Dallas now, it's like, whoa, it's like a country unto itself. But there was those towns like Lindale and Van, and kids would come in. And I mean, at that time, Clayton, Robbie Lee would have been 5A, I think. But we were working with some kids that won 2A titles. I think the DeRosa sisters, there's several people who won the Catholic school title. But Nina Riner, she was going to be a junior in high school, and she wanted to be a tennis player. Now, she had played tennis, but she had been a cheerleader, and she was playing basketball. And I said, well, if you want to really be a tennis player at a high level, I said, everything has to go, and you the next 2 years do this. So she actually joined the group. She would have been off to the side, shadow swinging and drop hitting a ball and someone tossing balls to her. So, she was athletic from the other sports. And I remember she won the Catholic tournament. And then the next year she went to the public school. So she might've been playing 5 or 6. I think she was playing 6 at Robert Lee. And she won the last match out for Robert Lee to win the state championship. So I remember I was given a copy of this ESPN. They recorded Julie Scott when she won the last match for Stanford. And I said to Julie, well, you have the experience having done this before. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, you're on a high school team where Nina Riner won the last match out. But that was one thing that was very important, is that you have to have a squad, but there were people, like Clayton said, when they joined the squad, they had to go backwards before they go forwards. You just can't put people in line. For our listeners, you can't just put people in line and start feeding balls. But I think one thing too, Clayton, is that as the years went by and you were down the road in tennis and you met so many people, we always talk to our students about, you can learn from everybody. Just because someone is not a technical expert, you certainly can learn so much about tennis through them. There's so many chapters to cover. Don't you feel like you had a BS filter if someone was starting to talk to you about a forehand or backhand and you knew right away that they weren't in the ballpark?
Yeah, definitely. And these days, I can just go look on social media. You can get all kinds of interesting tennis tips. But yeah, I think from the coaching and the background I have from the technical side, you definitely, and I think too, a lot of people were, there's probably some that are giving bad technical advice. And then I think a lot of it's probably just giving no technical advice, right? Just feeding balls and an athletic kid figures out some way to get the ball over the net, but it's, not, they could do it in a more efficient, effective way. But, I feel like, those are the two camps of people that, don't know what they're talking about, or the people realize they have no idea what they're talking about, so they just don't say anything.
With, I know David and I happened to be in Dallas doing a workshop or something for David, and we were at your wedding. So many of the Texas players were there. With David, why don't you comment on Mason Vaughn? He's somebody who spent a lot of time with us early on, and now he trains with you, and he's a national junior champion. I saw he was in ITF final the other day. But tell the connection between his father and Clayton's tennis.
Well, yeah, Clayton, you went through the same age group. Was Holt a year ahead of you? Were you a first year when you?
Holt was 2 years ahead of me, and he's still 2 years. Yeah, he lives in the same. His parents live in the same neighborhood that we live at here in San Antonio.
Yeah, the Alamo Heights area. He went to Alamo Heights High School, but so his son, he's like you. He really only has one school in mind, and that's UT. In that age group that you were in with, and they were a little bit ahead of you, those guys, but what first comes to mind when you think of like some of those people that you, maybe I'll name a couple from juniors, and then a few of the players that were on your team that were, teammates of yours down at UT. What did you learn from them? What comes to your mind when you start recalling some of your teammates? Was Steve Bryan there when you were there?
Yeah, Steve was. He was there. He was gone a few years before I was there. I got to know Steve through Scott Stewart, who obviously spent some time at TJC. But yeah, I'm friends with Steve Bryan, but we never crossed over on the team.
What words do you think of? Because I'm sure his legacy was left there a little bit. What words came in mind when Steve Bryan became a world-class player on the tour? But
I mean, he was like an unbelievable grinder. Like, really, stayed back. For the most part. I mean, a single specialist that could just, big strokes from the baseline and could really just, kind of, he's not going to miss, and he could kind of just, grind people down, but very, very aggressive from the baseline. He was, very, very competitive, and high level, NCAA champion at Texas. That had some success on the Pro Tour as well.
Steve Bryan and Scott Stewart. I was at the Orange Bowl with Clayton and his father. Clayton would have been playing the 12s, and Steve Bryan and Scott Stewart were playing, I believe, doubles together. They were definitely with each other, and Steve Bryan was great, but he certainly lacked the ability to really play from the service line in. And that's one thing with the background I brought to Tyler, Texas. As I said earlier, I was 26, and you haven't trained players when you're 26, but just like to be in Braden's camp where, first person I worked with was Jack Kramer's son. And then I taught Jack Kramer's youngest son to teach tennis for Vic. And then Ted Schroeder, when Wimbledon the first time he played, his son was on the staff. And so I'd have a critical eye. And we could comment on Scott Stewart. We coached him, Clayton, refresh your memory, for just one semester on an interim basis before John Peterson came in. And I'm asked all the time, someone you could coach, is that he was somebody who, I know his dad was a cross-country coach, and this guy, Scott Stewart, he'd run a mile if he had 140-degree temperature. And I remember your coach, Dave Schneider, saying to me one time about his doubles, well, if you could just, poke a little bigger serve and poke a volley, because he was just a fighter also from the baseline. He wasn't taught at a really young age. It's so important. He was a very, very good player, just like Steve Bryan. But I remember there's some limitations with their tennis game. And I think that's something. What would you comment? Let's go with Richard. What's your comment on tennis? Like today, junior tennis versus back when, say, Clayton was, you saw him play when he was just say 10, 11, 12. The skill set that he has versus what you think most kids have today as a base?
So, Clayton, I don't know if you know, I bought myself a property and I was able to build some grass tennis courts. And it's interesting when you actually watch kids who train on either clay or hard court year round or compete on those two surfaces for the most part of the year. And they come out, and the first thing you notice is that the kids with skill have way more variety, obviously, way more, though, but like exceptionally more. And they have way more enjoyment. So if I had to comment, going back to Clayton's era, to be honest, I thought there was more all-court play than there is today. I think kids today are sort of very one-dimensional. I think coaches are too, and in their understanding of play development. Up here, the game-based type coaching certification that coaches go through with limited technical information. So, that in itself limit, real skill development. Whereas I think 70s, 80s, there's a lot of consideration for stroke production. Some of it not so good, some of it very good. So I would say that today's players, certainly there's the athletic development. In terms of skill, I just envision more players being able to do more around the court than they can today. That's where you just observe them on grass, and the kids that have the most fun, the kids that have more skill, and that's just how it works out. So, I would say that if I had to choose one of the, I'd much prefer to coach back then than I would now. Although I do enjoy coaching now, but much more then than I do now.
I'll tell you a story based on that. TK Gorman, name of the Catholic school in Tyler, Texas. We were running their tennis team. We ran a fundraiser for them to improve their courts. And so then they had uniforms. And I wasn't doing it 100% altruism. The one self-motive was every summer I had a key to the campus, and there was 2 gyms that no one was using. One had a wooden surface and one had a tartan rubberized surface. And Dave, you would have been around during that time. Maybe you were in the neighboring town, but we had a weight room, we had a track, we had a small stadium, but we had this industrial portable tennis net that they use at exhibitions. And we set it up on we moved it around a few times, but we were playing on grass. I mean, it was, do you remember that, Clayton?
Yeah, no, I do remember how fast that surface was, and also the carpet at TJC that we played in when they built that indoor multi-purpose.
Yeah,
it was fun playing on those fast surfaces.
But those gyms were really packed during the basketball season. But it was so hot in Texas, still is hot and humid. But to have the kids go in the yellow gym floor, a yellow ball. And say, okay, let's play some doubles. Let's play even some singles. And you're definitely going to understand what a short, compact swing is, and being able to steal the ace, having that racket face be squared out. But coming back to Mason Vaughn, his dad, you mentioned his name, Holt from San Antonio. He went on and was good enough to play tennis at Davidson, but he didn't find out till he was much older. But he figured out that, say Clayton or Chad Clark, that they had a leg up from a technical standpoint. Yeah, Clayton, tell us some of your teammates when you were at Texas.
So, some of and back to when y'all were talking about, and this is one comment about, if people from small towns could, if they were at a disadvantage compared to, to Dallas, but, for most of my college career, like the five of us that were from the state of Texas on the town, like 4 of us were from small towns. You had myself from Tyler, Texas, Chad Clark from Longview. You had Eric Allen from Kerrville, Texas, and then you had Blake Rue from Denton, Texas, and then Trey Phillips from Austin was the one that was from Austin being a bigger city, but those were kind of the guys from Texas. All of those, Eric and Chad were 1 year older than me. Blake and Trey Phillips, who were the same age as Holt Vaughn, they were 2 years older. We had a lot of international players as well. We had a guy from Adelaide, Australia called Ali McDonald. We had these are some of the older guys. Anders Eriksson from Sweden, David Draper from England. And I know, Steve, I think you played, coached one of David's sons a little bit, I think. And then some of the younger guys, like those were kind of the guys that were, and there was a guy named Ernesto Ponte from Mexico. The younger guys, like BJ Stearns, was 1 year younger, 1 year younger than me. He's from, he was from Florida. His dad, Billy Stearns, was his coach. There was,
Jack Brasington from Miami, Florida. I played quite a bit of doubles with him at Texas, and he actually had a unique thing. I think he might have been the only person that ever done this, but he played some pro tennis after college and got ranked got as high as around 100 in the world, but he qualified for four consecutive Grand Slams where he actually had to go through the qualifying draw and won the 3 rounds to get into the main draw. And then he actually played, we actually went and watched him, it played in the U.S. Open. He won his first round in the main draw, then played Andy Roddick, in the second round, on a Friday night, TV match when Roddick, I think, was the number 1 seed. So that was a pretty cool experience.
With, you mentioned so many names. Trey Phillips, he's a big guy, huh? Class act. How would he, 6'5"?
Yeah. Big serve and volley. He's coming to the net on everything. Yeah, big one-handed backhand, big serve and volley.
Yeah, but I just remember, living in Texas, it was a big deal to watch, Texas play, and I just remember a little too much calculation from a technical standpoint. But that's another whole animal. I think of Coach Snyder, who recently passed away. It's a whole different deal. I think, if you're coaching an 8-year-old versus, like, say, when I started with you at age 6, that's a different challenge than meeting someone when they're 18 years old. Now they're on a college campus, they're living away from home, and it's that's a pretty tall order to have somebody totally rebuild their game at age 18. It could be done. I think that mentality slowly creeping into tennis, like say in football and basketball, where more people are doing what you did, where you redshirted. But go back to that. By the time you finished with a master's degree, correct?
Yeah, because of I was in the business school at Texas, and because of me redshirting my freshman year, which made sense because I wasn't going to get to play play much in the starting lineup, so it kind of made sense to redshirt. I was going to be there for 5 years because I wanted to fulfill my 4 years of athletic eligibility. So they had a 5-year master's program in accounting within the business school. So that's kind of, what I transitioned, into, like, is my major within the business school. So when I finished up, I didn't go to our graduation ceremony because in May of '98, when I finished, we were, playing in the NCAA championships. But when I finished there, I had a undergrad and a master's degree in accounting, and then when I finished up at Texas.
With no thanks. Let's go to doubles for a minute. Richard, I talked to Zach Kimmelman the other day. Congratulated him. He won the 18 doubles in Canada. Back in the day, it was just serve and volley. There was you didn't give anybody a choice. I mean, you just serve and volley from the get-go. But David, why don't you comment on the 4 girls that played in the 5A final, playing doubles, serve and volley, Texas tennis?
Lissa Kimmel, Julie Scott, Carmen Clark, and Laura Barrow. It really ties into Richard's comment on the eras because, the system has hurt the all court play as well as, tennis teaching. You can look at it from many different lenses, I think. And, the system, Clayton, when you, were a young man playing junior tennis, I mean, I can remember being at a junior tournament and watching you and Tim Hurst play, Philip Farmer and Bill Bailey. It was somewhere here in Dallas. I was there with Chad, I think, and I can't tell you who won the match, but I think he lost. You might have won it, but
we actually beat them in the state finals.
I know. I do remember that.
My sophomore junior year.
Yeah. So it was conventional double everywhere you looked at all the courts. People would go forward but it was the start right around there where people were starting to try to microwave games rather than slow cook them. And Carmen, Laura, Julie, and Lissa were certainly players that had grown up in environments where it wasn't even a second thought. They were just going in behind their serves, and all four girls ended up in the final of the state 5A. Again, I think that it gets lost sometimes when we maybe say that, because now Texas is 6A, but back then it was 5A. And all of the people throughout the state, for the most part, if you were a top 10 nationally ranked junior, you still played high school tennis. It's just not the case now. So I think that when we've talked about that, it probably doesn't stick with people like it probably should. But those four girls were crashing the net on every opportunity, and did it with a pretty good skill level already at that point, even though they weren't out of high school yet. And Lissa and Julie were certainly the better team, and the better team won. They were a little bit superior in every category, I think.
With wasn't Laura Barrow? She was working in Manhattan during 9/11, right? And she just went into work late that day.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Yeah. The building that got hit. Yeah.
With so many connections, you mentioned Philip Farmer. He's coaching Austin Krychek, who I started working with him, very similar to the age Clayton was at. We have that all documented on film and such. With Timmy Hurst's father, George Hurst, brilliant man. I remember, I believe it was Consolation 14's Cotton Bowl, and Timmy won. And I said, Philip was dominating. He was forcing and missing volleys and missing overheads. Philip has done, a lot of impressive things. He coached the Bryan brothers as well. And but yeah, with Timmy though, you guys won doubles serving going forward. He got the message in singles, but Timmy got that. Remember, he got the message in doubles to go forward, but he was a little bit reluctant to force in singles. But yeah, he still went on and played at SMU. You mentioned some of these names. They all went on and played Division I college tennis. There was a team at Robert E. Lee that the top 6 girls, they were all, I believe, ranked in the top 15 in Texas, and they all went on and played Division I tennis. Like a Nikki Conrad, some of those kids, they got to TCU, the DeRosa girls, and they thought the lab sciences were too much. But the results were there. But I would say that the second 5 years, I was there basically 10 years, and it was the second 5 years, the fruit of your labor. It takes a while to develop a tennis culture and develop a tennis player. With let's go back to Canada, Richard. What do you think?
Well, listen, for me, I just think that the development periods are too short. I think, the better players are those who are isolated and got to do quality reps on their own. That's what I think. But I also think that if tennis is to develop sort of long term, I think the development phase for players has to be extended, and that's through college, the college experience, and beyond. Competitively speaking, that is. And I think that if they changed the rules here, where they didn't play, and I mean this, TSL rules played NFL rules, then they would have the possibility of combining with U.S. colleges. One. So the kids that can't afford to go to the States because of the exchange rate, etc., the 4.5 scholarships and so on, Canadian schools could be competitive with U.S. schools. I think that would help Canadian development. I think that we need more adult players or more players going into adulthood than we do have now for Canadian tennis to be successful long term. Certainly we have, pockets or small windows of where you get like Shapovalov Auger-Aliassime and rescues and those kind of things happening. But I think they're just pockets. I think the tennis is limited to what we call the corridor, tennis development corridor, which is two major highways in Toronto. Between those two corridors, the best players come out of that corridor based on demographics, access to courts, coaches, etc. But outside of that, I think tennis is in trouble in Canada, to tell you the truth.
I was talking to someone just the other day, certainly with pickleball invading the courts, pickleball being so easy. But I think also too is that fundamentals. If people don't have a very good beginning, not only the prevention of injury, but the fun factor with the playing on clay, that certainly helps the European. Here's a story for you. Chad Clark's sister Carmen, pretty laid back, easygoing character, and Julia Scott. They show up in Boca Raton. I know, Richard, you spent a lot of time going back and forth with Canadian players, but David and I were at the defunct Seguzo Bassett Tennis Academy, which is now Chris Everett's. That was on hard court, but I remember it was just practice matches. But it was Luann Spadia who won the Orange Bowl, and Karina Marayu went on, got to be 28 in the world, won Wimbledon doubles. It was Carmen Clark was playing Luann Spadia, and Julie Scott was playing Karina Marayu. And the only reason I mention this is that the Texas kids won these practice matches, and there was no internet. It was just the internet came out in '89, so it just wasn't the way it is now, where you have a UTR and you know who you're playing. It was like, let's just go play a match. There was more of an innocence to it than there is now. Anybody have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, ignorance is bliss. Yeah, the kids now go in with a disadvantage because the parents have researched the backgrounds of every opponent to the point of, analyzing every win and loss they've had over the last year, their UTR, what it looks like. It's changing hard and quick. Over the past 5-7 years, it's just become messy, and it's the same everywhere. I had a coach visiting that worked here for 12 years from Prague. She visited from Prague this week, and she said it's the same there. And she is arguably the best coach at her facility, but she feels like she's at a stark disadvantage, number one, because it's a male-dominated profession. Number two, because she's sending a message of slow down, do this, do that, and think long-term. And, Carmen probably had no idea who Luann Spadia was. There was an innocence about it, and I think it allowed him to just play the ball a little bit more, not the reputation. I imagine it's how Clayton felt when he first got across the net from me in the Cotton Bowl or wherever we sparred. And, he probably had a lot of trouble just playing the ball. Clayton, you can speak up at any time, but
I'll try to keep it civil.
That's probably good. I'm 10 years your elder, so you got to respect your elders still.
With
what?
Go ahead, Clayton.
No, I was gonna say one thing on that. Just going back to when I was playing junior tennis. I think to some degree, most tennis matches are over before they start, right? So, when you're playing the same kids in junior tennis, and whether you're playing someone that you usually, most matches are you're going to win the match before it starts, or someone may be thinking they don't have a shot. They're playing someone that they haven't been able to beat before. So there you had that knowledge just from results that I get. When you're playing in a different tournament, maybe and that's playing someone that you hadn't played before, you really kind of had no idea, I guess. But with the internet nowadays and the ratings and stuff, I agree. There's no way, you know everything about that person, and you're going to look at a number and it's going to tell you whether or not that, statistically, somebody views you as either better or worse than the person that you're
walking on the court again. So I imagine it's like, that could be tough for, some players where they kind of, already have an idea of the result of the match before they ever hit the first ball.
Yeah.
And here's a question for you. When you're at Texas, I mean, someone like Kevin Curran, I've mentioned him many times because, he played in the NCAA final with a two-handed forehand. He played in the Wimbledon final with a one-handed forehand. So you can make changes in your game. He went to Texas at first, got homesick. He went home, came back. During your tenure at UT, were some of those players training at the UT campus?
Occasionally, people would, come through. It'd be more like, some of the, the recent guys that were maybe, on tour that would stop through, occasionally. I think that happens, it happens more so now. But yeah, Curran came by, obviously, but I remember, my first really remembering of, Kevin, other than having met him like once, through like a UT alumni deal, but I remember him like losing to Becker in that was that the first Wimbledon that Becker won?
Yeah, 1985. Yeah, Curran had beaten McEnroe and Connors both in that tournament. No, I mean, I've had a chance to spend a lot of time with Steve Denton, who played. He's been a guest on our podcast. Here's a Steve Denton story. He poaches, and he's just got a sitter, and he's going to tag Ken Rosewell in the chest, and the ball comes right back and hits Denton. So Denton always tells that about the difference from one level to the next. But let's go back to Coach Snyder. What was it like working with Coach Snyder? He seemed like such an easygoing guy. We were flattered. I was speaking, Richard or David might have been there speaking at a USPTA Texas workshop. And he asked us to help him teach a coaching class. So, we were flattered to be able to send him information to help him with his coaching class. But what was it like to play for Coach Snyder?
It was good. I think he created a great culture there. Like, I mean, obviously he was able to, we went to a good school in a good city. He was able to recruit really good tennis teams. And, UT's always had a competitive tennis team that, always, is in contention to, compete for national titles. One thing about, we were talking about the different styles of play, Coach Snyder was a very accomplished player, back in the day, and he was very much, chip and charge, serve and volley, getting it at all costs. So like, that was big for him in doubles. So like, we were, everyone that was in the, doubles lineup was, aggressive in getting to the net. I mean, that was the way he viewed tennis should be played. Nowadays, you can watch a lot of college tennis matches on TV and on the internet. Y'all are making comments there. I'm amazed at and even at the college tennis level, I mean, the kids hit it so hard now, but like how much two back there is. Whereas like when I was playing college tennis, the only time that anyone would ever stay back, in men's college tennis was on occasion if somebody was struggling with, you're playing against somebody that had a really big first serve and somebody was struggling to get their returner serve down cross court and people were poaching on them, then you might pull the guy, go two back for the first serve. But nowadays, you see a lot of college tennis with doubles where a lot of people at the baseline and hitting big ground strokes in the baseline.
When you were during the summers, did most of your teammates, did they play or did they do internships? They work summer camps? What was the norm?
Most people, what everyone did back then was go play a lot of people would play the satellite event. There was one, like there was a series of satellite tournaments where you could get ATP points, if you won enough matches that were like one of the stops was in Lafayette, Louisiana. There was one in Waco, one in Austin. And then there would be like a Masters tournament of that series that was in Oklahoma. So we would all, a lot of the college tennis players, not just from Texas, but really from all over the U.S., we typically try to play in these satellite tournaments, and get practice that way. Yeah, and then we would stick around. We would stick around Austin. Most people would do some summer school if they needed, to get some extra credits. But then we would just practice in Austin when people weren't traveling, playing tournaments. But yeah, most people would kind of stick around Austin for the most part. I think I went home to Tyler just the one summer after my freshman year, and then after that, other than that, I kind of stayed in Austin and played in the satellite tournaments, and then it was had a little success one summer where we won. Me and my partner Mark Lawhern, who was from Wisconsin, but we picked up an ATP point because we won enough main draw matches in the doubles. So I have I got to find it somewhere. I had a printout. This is all kind of with the very infancy of the internet, but at one point I think we were ranked like 1,000 in the world in doubles with one ATP point, but like Andre Agassi, who never played doubles. I guess he probably maybe played one tournament one time just to favor someone, but he also had one ATP point in doubles. So on the ATP ranking sheet, you could see my name next to Andre Agassi's. So it was kind of a funny thing. But yeah, they one other cool thing we got to do at Texas was they have a rule at the University of Texas that every 4 years each sport can take an international trip so like a basketball team could go to Australia and play a series of exhibitions and basketball events. So our tennis team, the summer after my senior year of college, we went over to England and played and played a handful of grass court satellite tournaments. So that the university paid for. So that was really cool. That was the only time I had been able to play any tournaments on grass. So kind of suited my style of game. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's a great experience with reflecting Holt Vaughn and his son Mason from the club that I know you visited Richard's the club Richard had was for 30-some years, Richmond Hill Country Club in Toronto. Here's a challenge for you. A gal who's on the women's team from Madagascar. Can you say her last name? Nomina?
Oh gosh. Nomina, God, I'll butcher it so bad if I try to say it.
Or Hernandez.
Go ahead.
Or I think it's Hernandez.
Say it one more time.
Hernandez.
When I talked to Jeff Moore, he could sing it. He had it. That's a great accomplishment. Actually, her maiden name is not quite as challenging, but her daughter worked with her. I've known her, I think, the last 3 years. But coming back to, she was on a national championship team when you were a student, and she certainly had an appreciation for your ball striking skills, just like the day Richard met you. What are your recollections from Jeff Moore and how he went about things? Were you pretty in tune with that?
Yeah, they had they had a great team. I know he's known as like a great motivator as well. I think that, kind of after he got out of college coaching, after leaving Texas, I think he kind of, his profession now is he was doing like some, sports consulting for teams and stuff like that. Like, and even some like, companies on, kind of organizational, like culture development and things like that. Yeah. So Jeff, he had a lot of success, and they won a couple national titles around it. One of them while I was in school there, and one I think the year before I got there. But yeah, no, he was known as a great coach, and recruited some great teams, and they had a very very competitive team there in the mid to late 90s.
Well, I didn't do my homework. I met him a couple times when I was in Tyler, Texas, and he was in Austin. And certainly I knew he was the UT coach. I had no idea all these connections. Tennis World's a small place that he, as I said earlier, played for Coach Verdick. Bruce Burke, he has a connection to our program at Tyler Junior College because he worked for Craig Tiley. Tiley was at Tennis Tech for 7 years. Why don't you comment on Texas, the state of the men's team now? They're very, very strong, right?
Yeah, they really good team. Obviously, Bruce took over the program, a few years ago in the middle of the season, and they, ended up winning Texas's first national title that year. And they, obviously came really close this past year. They were, I think they were the favorite. They had beaten TCU just a couple in the conference championship, right before the NCAA's, and then obviously lost in it came down to, I think, number 6 singles in the third set, and they lost that 4-3. So they have a great team. I think they have a really, really good, team this year. So, they had, a kid, the best player in college tennis for the last few years, was a senior who graduated last year, Elliot Spizzeri. He did well. He qualified for the U.S. Open this year, and he's kind of, making his way up the, pro ranks. I think he's up to like 300 in the world right now. I mean, he just won a challenger last week. But yeah, they he seems to be doing a great job. I've met him a few times and talked to him a few times from some alumni events. But now this is the first year that Texas is moving into the SEC for tennis, so that'll be interesting. Getting to play some of the kind of rival teams that some traditional tennis powerhouse programs like Georgia and Florida and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to get to play some new teams versus the Big 12 was very competitive, but there weren't many tennis teams left in the Big 12. Really at playing Oklahoma, Baylor, Texas Tech, but they kind of the Big 12 has slowly dropped the men's tennis programs over the last couple of decades. When I was there, I think everyone had a tennis program in the Big 12. I think other than maybe Kansas State, there was maybe been like one school that didn't, but I know they've slowly had to drop the men's tennis programs over the last several years.
One of your teammates is in charge of the Oklahoma team, correct?
Yeah, Nick Kroll. It's funny. You mentioned Steve Denton. Obviously, so the two of Texas's biggest rivalry, or I should say, our Texas's two biggest sports rivals are A&M and Oklahoma. And on the tennis side, both are coached by former UT players. Nick Kroll was one of my teammates. He was a couple years younger than me, so we overlapped by a few years. And he was a very good player out of Amarillo. And but then obviously Steve Denton, who we mentioned earlier, who was doubles partners with Kevin Crane.
What's it called? The Ring of Honor. But yeah, he's very accomplished Texas player. The inside joke is his underwear is burnt orange. He might be wearing Texas A&M colors, but
I talked to him for a little bit at Coach Snyder's funeral not too long ago. So yeah, he's still a Texas fan for football and things like that. But when they're not playing A&M, but yeah, he's been at A&M now for a while, and I know Nick's doing well at Oklahoma. Nick originally was the assistant coach at Florida State for Dwayne Holtquist, who was Coach Snyder's assistant coach when I was playing there. Then Dwayne took the head job at Florida State, a while back, and Nick went and worked for him for a while before getting the OU job.
Yeah, I have connections. My son's, he didn't start at Ohio State. He went to Florida State first. He was an All-American at Florida State, and a few other players I've worked with have played at Florida State. Let's do this, Richard and Clayton. David, are you 60 now? Let's talk about David Anderson playing 60 and over, winning nationals. Let's go with you, Richard, first. What advice do you have for him to get ready for the national 60s?
Coconut oil. Really smooth it.
Coconut oil, that's just it?
Well, You know, as fit as Dave Anderson is, I don't think he'll have a problem.
I'm rubbing it on me right now. Should I rub it on me or drink it?
What do you
coconut oil?
What do you think, Clayton? I mean, you remember his serve, right, Clayton? What do you think he's got any other major holes in his game?
He saw Clayton saw Anderson 2.0, maybe 5.0. It just kept getting better with age.
His holes are at the baseline. He needs to get to the net as quickly as possible.
Clayton, I appreciate your 5 decades of life, but I'm ready to. I hate baseline games, but I'm ready to go feed in baseline games. I'll meet you halfway. We'll meet in Waco.
We can do
right
that.
Now. We'll stream it. We'll call Steve Bryant. We'll get it streamed right now. I'm just coming off an ECU injury, like Muhova, and I'm pretty confident. I know which direction this is going to go.
We'll definitely need to film it because Dave's memory tends to he sometimes misremembers results and how things turned out. So we'll definitely need a record of it. Otherwise, I already know how it will be reported after the match.
I always thought his strength was remembering the scores and even what court people played on.
It is in certain cases, though. I do have a vague recollection.
Yeah,
I always gave Clayton a hard time. He goes, I was 15. And I said, I don't care. I play the ball.
One of your superiors, gentleman you work for, Dick Tucker, he used to say, Anderson's got a mind like a steel trap. With
Steve, on a match that I never forget, I watched Clayton play. I think it was Clayton. You'd have to remind me. You played TJ Tisdale in the Cotton Bowl. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do.
That was a great match because TJ, you know him, and Steve, you know him. Richard, he was played small college tennis, came on as a staff member early on here, 28, 29 years ago. But he was a terrific athlete, under 6 foot tall, but, I could alley-oop to him in basketball and he could dunk. And his relative was Wayman Tisdale, who was an NBA Hall of Famer, played at Oklahoma, actually. But he got to the point where his tennis was pretty legitimate. And, I watched him beat Clayton, a guy from just a little older than you, Michael Flanagan, in the finals of the Cotton Bowl one year, 2-2. Justin Bauer, who was a terrific player. He was right there with Tommy Ho in a match. I was kind of coaching him as a player and a coach, but you caught him at a period where I think he had won like 6 straight Cotton Bowls. And from the quarters on, it was probably like a satellite. Wouldn't you agree at that time?
Yeah, it was real tough. Yeah.
And you guys met early, if I remember, second round.
Well, yeah, I think it was first round. When I saw the draw, I was like, I know I'm one of the top, few players in this tournament, but I'm playing the number 1 seed in the first round. So
yeah, it easily could have been the final. I remember looking at it and thinking, what a crazy draw. But that was a 3-setter, 7-6 in the third. Is that right?
Yeah, that was. Yeah, that tournament got such good players because it was over the Christmas break, so all the college people were off on holiday. So all the people that lived in Texas that were playing college tennis would all play in the Cotton Bowl just to start getting some matches as they got ready for reporting back for the spring season in a couple weeks. So yeah, it was always an amazing field and tournament.
Yeah, all your teammates you mentioned. I watched all of them go deep in there. Blake Rue, Phillips, Eric Allen, everybody played it. Chad Clark never played it. Chad did. He was probably scared. He might have to play you in the tournament or whatever. Well, I would have hooked him to death. But anyways, yeah, I remember that match with TJ because it was the highest level match in the whole tournament. Unfortunately, it happened in the first round. But you guys were banging the ball and crashing the net well, and both of you had tremendous skills. But TJ is an example of a guy who, going back to an earlier comment. The game can be molded later in life. And he just took to it right away because he didn't have any negotiations in his mind. He just said, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to do it. And, a few years later, he was really playing at a different level than he was in his collegiate years.
TJ. I could tell TJ stories. I was at Kalamazoo and it's raining all day. And so TJ and I sit down with Bud Schultz. Bud Schultz was a guest on our podcast. He got to be 39 in the world, basketball player, 6'4". I know you helped me with Christo. Christo's son came through our program first, and we sent him out to you. And so I remember just saying, TJ said, this guy could just mop you up on the floor, just use you as a mop on a basketball floor. And they started going at it. But I think this is when TJ was not at his best. I'm sure he's a little bit older, a little bit overweight. But my son Connor had spent quite a bit of time at your place, but he hadn't been there in a long time. And, you get towards the end of the 18s. I said, yeah, I'll send you out there. You can play the coaches. And so he goes out and plays TJ. And my son Connor, he didn't have a water jug. He would go to a garbage can, rinse out a tennis ball can, and fill it with water. That was he wasn't going to show up with a thermo. So, and that's a throwback. That's how everybody did it years ago. So I said, this is what's going to happen. You're going to play TJ, and you're going to walk around the net post, and he's going to just bump right into you. Be ready for him to just give you the shoulder. And I said, the next time he comes around the neck post, he's going to kick over your water jug, your tennis ball can. And I said, and then also he's going to use the John McEnroe line where McEnroe said about Lendl, I have more talent in my pinky than you have in your whole body. So my son Connor came back. He goes, how did you know? How did you know? I said, yeah. I just knew. But one more story. We have to ask a Chad Clark question. I have to ask Richard if you were around Chad that much. But so Anderson brings a group of players, a large group, young players, old players, interns to Tampa, Florida. And I just know at that time, you're looking around the courts and Rod DeHart, he could he was ranked 1 in the 18s. One time he was 1 in the NCAAs, played Nadal and Arthur Ashe. So he became a pretty accomplished player. So I don't know, maybe he was 16 years old. Like, Anderson's picking you out. You're the best player here today. He's going to play you. And I remember the next morning, we got there early, put the camera up, and I said, first thing in the morning, we're going to make Anderson play. No warm up, just play. And I said, you're going to come in on every second serve is, and you're serving volley first and second balls. I said, because if you don't come to the net, he's going to beat you to the net. Anyway, we had some fun with that. But Richard, do you remember Chad Clark? Were you around him at all?
Not really. I mean, vaguely I remember the name. I know that he was spent a ton of time with Dave, but other than maybe a couple of times when he was like in his late teens, I remember watching him some balls against the wall. That's about it. Not much.
I remember being with you in Canada, and he played the Canadian Open, and I think he only played pro tennis for 9 months. Clayton, you would know probably better than Dave even that. What comes to your mind, Clayton, with Chad Clark? If you were to say a few things about his tennis.
Yeah, I mean, he was, really good all court games. He was really competitive. He's one of the guys that obviously I grew up practicing with Chad, and but he's the type that obviously we played a lot of practice sets against each other in juniors and even more so in college and stuff. But he's he would never take a day. Like he wants to beat you every time. Like, some guys would be like, oh, it's practice, but no, Chad was, really competitive, solid, big forehand, big serve, good doubles player. He was a fine NCAA doubles finalist. He was ranked number 1 in college in singles, obviously, from the, from working with Dave had good technical skills. I think, one thing he didn't like to try. I mean, I think for him to have played pro tennis long, he hated traveling. So I think he really didn't like the grind of what it would take to those first few years of traveling around the world and, playing in the lesser events to work your way up. So I think he kind of just got a little homesick and, didn't want to keep traveling like that. So that's why I think he kind of gave it up, after a short period of time. But a good friend of mine, and he was really, really good, accomplished tennis player.
Here's a story for you. Winning is confusing. Where do all the lines come from? Timmy Hurst, his name's come up. Great kid, great player. But, I don't think if he had taken one, maybe two practice sets from Chad Clark. So we have a match, and it's being charted. Bill Jacobson wasn't there, but Steve Abramson was. So it's charted, and Timmy beats Chad in this one set that's being charted. And it was just a great learning experience for everybody involved because, as Abramson was saying, Timmy, you got killed. Chad just totally dictated the points. The match was on his racket. He was the one, missing shots and forcing. We tell people winning's not confusing. It's totally confusing. So, David, what was Chad, like 12 and 13 when he started beating you?
Yeah, right around there. I think Clayton hit the nail on the head.
No, come on. When we started taking sets from you.
Oh no, geez! I think he was a senior. He would have been a senior in college, but he turned pro his sophomore year. So, no, I think Clayton hit the nail on the head. That's one thing you mentioned with Mason Vaughn. He travels well. I remember traveling out to, I don't get to go out much, but I remember taking Ashlyn Kruger to the USTA. She was the last invite to a camp out there. And I wanted to go just to see how she traveled, really. It was just her and I, because, she never really had anything but the dream of what she's doing now. And she traveled exceptionally well, and she's fine being on her own. She was totally fine and quiet. I think Chad's best experiences out there on the tour were when he did the one summer where he went with a bunch of guys, and it was sleeping multiple people in a room. And I think as he showed signs that he might be able to do some things, I think it got lonely for him out there. In his mind, I don't think he enjoyed any aspect of it. And but he was, I think his biggest strength was the mind, and he had a strong determination. I do remember the commitment from his parents, just like your dad, Clayton, and his willingness to do whatever. I always think of Vicky Clark, Chad's mother, feeding balls to him out there on the courts, while Longview High football games, and you know how football was back there on Friday nights. I know Chad didn't hit every one of them, or he got there late because she'd be pumping out balls to him. So, usually there's a lot of parental sacrifice, it seems, of some sort, whether it's from a mother, father. But he didn't really kick it in, till right around that period of his sophomore year. I was telling Holt Vaughn, Chad didn't tear it up at Kalamazoo. Clayton, you'll remember this name. I remember Chad getting tuned up by Tad Berkowitz when I was at the zoo with him. And Berkowitz, was a top 10 national junior, a little lefty from Florida. And but Chuck Creasy happened to be sitting there, and I don't think he recognized me, and I might not recognize him if we sat beside each other again. But he said this match isn't even going to be competitive in a few years, and he was right. But it's got to be in your heart, right? That's why I asked you the question earlier, Clayton, about what's kind of been the catalyst behind you continuing to hold a racket and go out and swing a racket and have the motivation to meet me in Waco to get beat. I mean, that's admirable at your stage of life.
One thing, Chad winning the high school state tournament as a sophomore, there was no off factor. And then, Clayton and Alyssa, you mentioned some of these, Alyssa and Julia, all these kids, they went on and won high school state tournaments, which was a big deal at the time. Everybody played high school tennis. But it was one of those things like, if Chad can do it, I can do it. So he did definitely help out that sense of belonging. But, with kids who get the opportunity to do that on an international stage, it's just amazing how much that helps them out. I'm always amazed where so many people really, they just put a ceiling on how good they can be just based on their inner belief system. With
Clayton, why don't you comment for a moment on, because, when we made a few things, spoke about a few things here about, Tyler and East Texas and the size of it. But like you said, the realities of the college teams, and then also the period where Steve was able to bring in some incredible players that, were junior players, John Diaga, Jeff Coetzee, Kostas Skopelaitis, and all of these names that you probably got to interact with, because Chad had that luxury too, and Hubert Karash, Matt Zizette, some of these great college players that would come in and train. So in some ways, Tyler might have been an advantage, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, in addition, because kind of towards the latter part of while Steve was in Tyler, some of the players you mentioned of the South African kids that came through, which were all these were guys that were very accomplished players, and then went on to do great things in pro tennis as well. But also, the one thing about Tyler too, that for the size count it was, is that at the time, Tyler Junior College was the top junior college tennis program in the country, and you had UT Tyler that was the top NAIA school at the time. So there were a lot of and some of the players in both of these schools would go there. They could have played at D1 schools, but maybe they needed to get their grades up. They didn't have the test score, the academic test scores to get into a D1 school, and they needed to start somewhere else first. So yeah, I mean, I got a lot of access to there were a lot of good tennis players from the junior level up through college players that were rolling through Tyler at the time. So yeah, I think that definitely would have been an advantage.
One thing with Tyler, I mean, certainly the tennis teaching program, we had people from all over the world, and the level of coaches that were coming in to help us out were all world, for the most part, maybe not all of them, but so many of them were world renowned. But there was, I didn't know it, but I was breaking monopoly. I mean, there was one brother who I coached his daughter. She became a Division II All-American. I remember her coming to thank me. But then the other brother, it was just bad politics where, we had a clinic that cost $1 to go to. And, it certainly wasn't, as I mentioned earlier, when Vic Braden came down at the third time, there was a president of the club said, "Hey, I'd like to have all my coaches come and spend time with Braden while he's in Tyler." And I said, the last 2 times he was here, I invited everybody free of charge, but they didn't come. So this time around, I did invite them. But so that's one thing for the listeners. I did bring in a handful of players. Craig Tiley, who was working so hard, working guy, smart. But that really helped launch his career internationally because you already mentioned Jeff Coetzee and John Diaga. They went on and became Davis Cup players. And then Tiley, I mean, he's director of instruction initially at Illinois, and he coaches on an interim basis. And next thing you know, he's the Davis Cup captain. And he certainly was skilled. But yeah, that it was just an interesting time where. But we took the players, and there's lots of there's like at one time the Newcomb Academy. That goes in cycles too, but way back at one point, there was really strong players at Nukes. Then it was like, well, everybody's got to go to Florida. And that's just another thought, people going to Florida. I mean, Richard, you could comment on that. I think the Canadians now, you helped out so many players. They became so much better, but they hit the age of 14. And I've told so many Canadians, you have an inferiority complex when it comes to tennis, superiority complex when it comes to hockey. I mean, the Canadians lose, and they are the best. Even if they lose, they're still the best. I understand that. But, because of some of the immigrants that have done so well, I think a lot of the Canadians realize that you don't have to, shoot off to Florida. But yeah, you can become a great tennis player anywhere. I mean, that was a fun time for the listeners hanging in there with this podcast. That there was definitely something special that was created during those years in Tyler, Texas. But Richard, why don't you make a comment or two, and we got to ask Clayton what's he doing now? 50 years old.
Well, I just got. I'm going to make a comment. I'll ask Clayton because it'll just come down to commentary in the end. I'll ask him that. So, Clayton, do you recall the first time what you did, where it happened, that Steve had to reprimand you? And how you reprimanded?
He was a perfect child.
Yeah, man, I was so. It probably. I'm trying to remember. I was a pretty good rule follower. I didn't cut up too much. It's probably about making a dumb decision on the tennis court, but yeah, nothing can, nothing comes to mind. I'm in those early years, I'm sure obviously, just the normal coach student relationship. There's a lot of, there's definitely reprimands and back and forth. I mean, nothing really comes, no specific incident comes to mind.
There's too many to pick from. There's too many to pick from. I'd have to get a psychologist to deep brain. This is some PTSD stuff here. This is outside of our pay grade.
Well, I'd have to say though that I say it all the time. Days are long and decades are short, or the other way around. Decades are short and days are long. But that was a different time working with college students, and that was a. I mean, I could go on and on about the reprimands of, college students. I remember one thing with Clayton is that I had this old pickup truck, and it was a certain color where the kids called it the toilet. It was a beat up old little pickup truck. So I traded that in, and I got a new pickup, a white pickup truck, and they called that toilet too. And I had that because we were teaching tennis on every public park. We had 100 students. We had to create experiences for them to teach tennis. So we didn't have a budget. Dave Anderson tells a story about the milk crates. So that's what we put tennis balls in, is milk crates. So there's just too many times. The place had 2 bucket seats, and there were some pretty well-known people that sat in the middle. There was only a 2-seater. I remember Braden, calling himself Fat Albert, and he's going, "No, I'll sit in the middle. I'll sit in the middle." There is no middle. But Clayton, I do remember giving him a hard time because you complained about what a lousy vehicle I had. I had this pickup truck, and every time it was like, okay, 3 people in it, and he'd be the small guy. He'd ride in the middle. But I mean, I begged his dad. I begged his dad when he turned 16. I said, because he bought him a car so he could drive around and go to tennis practice and this and that. So the car helped his tennis. But I begged his dad. I said, hey, when he turns 16, give him my pickup truck. Give him my pickup truck. And he didn't do it. Such a nice guy. That jukebox, whatever happened to that jukebox that you had in your room? That was amazing. You still have that?
My mom's house, she still has like the Wurlitzer, jukebox. That truck story doesn't surprise me because my dad, who owned a car dealership, and so he had a tow truck associated with his business. And, my dad sometimes would have to get one of the guys that worked for him would have to drop me off at tennis practice or at school. And, whenever the guy driving the tow truck would have to drop me off at school, I'd have him drop me off around the corner. So I'd walk the last few hundred yards. So that comment doesn't surprise me about the truck.
Tell the listeners, what are you doing now, Clayton? San Antonio.
Yeah, I work for a private equity firm out of San Francisco, but based here in San Antonio. So I help run their mergers and acquisitions. So we buy businesses and then keep buying businesses to add on to those, businesses to, increase them in size, and then eventually, sell those to, someone else, like a larger private equity firm. So that's kind of what I'm doing. It's, it's finance and mergers and acquisitions. So that's kind of the line of work I've been in my, whole career. But, I moved to San Antonio for a similar role back in 2019, and then just recently moved to this company just a few months ago.
How often do you call Dave Anderson for help?
I'll actually offer help to him after we play in Waco, so he can have more success on trying to get a gold ball in the 60s and overs.
Hey, we should actually, Clayton. I think you and I should play Westwood. And they go back to Austin. We can play Westwood in May. That's the big sectional for. And I'll drop down and play 50 doubles, and because you can't, And then I'll play 60 singles. You play 50 singles, and then we'll play 50 doubles. If we, let's do that.
Hey, I'm in. I know. I haven't played. I know you guys obviously well. I know Buddy Farrington's got himself at least one gold ball. I know Buddy played a lot of the adult the age tournaments over the years. I know I don't know, he might have won like a 40s or 45s or something in doubles on that.
There's no gold ball for this, but Westwood's a good tournament. So that's
Westwood's good. Yeah, no, it's good. I practiced a decent amount there in college. That would be a good tournament.
And for our listeners, David's a righty and Clayton's a lefty. You guys going to play forehands in the middle?
I'm going to have to return in the ad court because everybody they keep serving my backhand over there, and it's the only thing I can do on the return. So I get the backhand cross.
Yeah, I returned in the deuce. I was the only left. I was the only lefty on the team in Texas, so I pretty much always played the deuce. I liked having the forehands in the middle and being able to poach off of a good return.
That's where Dave Tibbetts was coaching Westwood for a while. Probably when you were there, Clayton.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah, I know. I remember Dave.
Upstate New York boy.
Mm-hmm.
With that sounds like a plan. And what about your family, Clayton? What are they up to?
Yeah, so I have a wife and 3 kids. My oldest 2 boys are 13 and 11, and then have a 9-year-old daughter. So they're all playing. The boys are actually playing some tennis, kind of getting started with it. And and they also play the team sport. They love flag. Actually, the middle boy played flag last year, flag football, and the oldest just started tackle football, in the 7th grade this year. And then, but they play basketball. Then my daughter plays, basketball, softball. She does competitive cheer. So they're keeping themselves busy with, lots of activities.
With, no lacrosse, huh?
The boys actually play. It's actually gotten pretty big here. We're trying to get the boys back into it. They both played it one year and actually liked it. It's just kind of like, getting over scheduled with all the different activities they have. So we may try to get them to do it again this year, but it's actually become pretty popular. I had never put a lacrosse stick in my hands until a couple of years ago, like throwing the ball around with them in the yard. But it's fun to watch. I would have enjoyed playing it, as a kid if it had been around back in the day.
Yeah, I think pickleball unfortunately is taken over, but for the longest time, lacrosse was the fastest growing sport in America. Let's go with one more question from each guest for Clayton. Why don't you go, Richard, and then you go, David, and we'll wrap this thing up.
Clayton, if you had to look back on the most meaningful tennis experience, I'm talking competitively, which one would you say that would be meaningful?
meaningful, probably I mean, I'd have to say the most meaningful, like, if I was going to put it down to a match, I'd go to college at kind of like, playing at the highest level. Actually, I'll bring up a name that Dave mentioned earlier. We were playing a big college tournament over spring break called the Blue Gray in Montgomery, Alabama. Which is a lot of college teams would play it, over their spring break, kind of in the middle of the season before like NCAAs were happening and stuff. But it came down. I think we lost in the semifinals, and we were playing like the third, fourth playoff. This was like my junior year, I think, and it ended up some rain delays, so that we played singles first. Which is obviously not the norm in a college tennis match. I wasn't playing singles that day, but ended up being tied 3-3 after singles, and we were playing New Mexico. Tim Cass was the coach there at the time, who ended up being the A&M coach, later. But so we had now go play the doubles, since it actually matters. And I was playing 3 doubles with Jack Brazington, and it came down. We ended up. It came down to our match, and Jack Brazington and I were playing Tad Berkowitz, who was playing, who was at New Mexico, who Dave mentioned earlier. But we ended up getting down 2 breaks early, in a pro set, which is hard to come back for that. But then Jack and I went on a run. We ended up winning the pro set like 9-7, and we kind of got in the zone and were playing, and ended up that being that was the only time where I was the last person on the court. We're winning the clinching match. Obviously it doesn't happen that often in the matches come down to 4-3, but also to come down to where you're the last one on and we won it. That was pretty cool experience. And then obviously some of the other winning the state championships in high school were big, but that was probably if I had to look back on one tennis match, that was a pretty cool experience.
Oh, thanks. Go ahead, David.
Good one.
Well, Clayton, about every 2 or 3 years, I think I end up looking back and kind of just shaking my head at how stupid I was 2 or 3 years ago. And what would your 50-year-old self tell you have a dream at 14, 15 to play high level tennis. What would your 50-year-old self go back and tell 14-year-old Clayton Stanley?
With regards to tennis, I would say, and I took tennis very seriously, but I would even kind of, go back and, even work harder, right? Like, in college and stuff, because you only get the one chance to do it, right? Maybe like, you were, more interested, you were, hanging out with your friends and stuff like that. But like, no, those opportunities to play, a competitive sport at a high level, you don't get another chance. So like, I would, kind of, work even harder, and don't take anything for take anything for granted. Because I think especially at the at high levels of tennis, I mean, lots of people, a lot of good athletes. Everyone's got got skill and stuff, but the one thing you can control is how hard you work and what you put into it, right? So like kind of like give everything you have, and don't leave anything on the table, right? But just to make sure you're kind of maximizing every ounce of potential and opportunity that you have.
Oh, that's great. Let me say this, going back to, first, you have to start somewhere. And with your dad, basically, I had a partnership with David Stanley. I mean, that's really what it came down to, it was a partnership, and okay, we're going to bring this kid up to be a tennis player, and this is what has to be done. There's just so many things with David. I one time was in Europe, and if I had gone to Europe for a month, and I certainly would have had, someone like Dave Anderson or so many other people in that area to help me out, say, hey, these two guys need to do this, this, and this. And we had a program. And I remember showing up at a match, a doubles match. Clayton and Timmy Hurst were up 5-0. So I walk up and they fall apart and they lose. And for the longest time, David called you guys the 5.0 boys. Not like 5.0 NTRP, but five.
I remember that well. Yeah.
So he was a chirper too. I mean, he just got it. He just understood what it took to become an athlete, and so many things I can remember. I could tell a story. Richard, you get a kick out of this. Jim Rogers, who worked for you, a Canadian, he can't say, he's been on our podcast, he can't say a sentence without the word F. And Clayton's a young kid, and his dad worked on the weekends, and I couldn't go. And so I asked Jim Rogers, the college students needed to make money. And I said, Rogers, want to make some money this weekend on a coaching trip? Yeah. So they drove to Corpus Christi, which is like on the other side of the world. I mean, it's got to be 10 hours one way, 10 hours back. And I remember telling Clayton, I said, Clayton, you ought to just not tell your mother how this guy talked to you. But so we just go on and on. But we had an example of Clayton hit the ball really well. So when people visit our program, it's like, okay, watch this 6-year-old hit the ball. And just like when Richard first saw him, Arthur Ashe said that about WBY Van Horn is you can tell a WBY Van Horn student a mile away. And I think it's unfortunate when people can pick out a GreatBase student and they can just tell. Both Richard and David, for our listeners, they've trained so many players that people can just look down the courts and go, that kid's efficient. That kid's got great ball striking skills. But instead of taking that as a compliment, it's really an insult to our sport, because overall, people aren't really taught great fundamentals from the beginning. That's what we're trying to do with the GreatBase. The GreatBase is basically a research project from those years in the 80s when we had that tennis teaching lab, and we've put together these systems like with Braden and Vandermeer and Van Horn and Jacobson and on and on and on. But actually, our listeners, Richard's partner, Carl Hale, he runs, when you say he runs the Canadian Open, what's his title? Director of the Canadian Open?
Yeah, tournament director.
I think he says it quite well, is that, to really make it in the limelight of tennis coaching is you got to hit home run. And what he means by that is you got to be coaching a marquee player. Somebody that Richard and Dave both have met. Mike Costa is just climbing the ladder comedian. And he played for Craig Tiley. Then he spent time with us after Illinois. And he told me, he said, well, being a pro player and a comedian is the same thing, is that if you're on TV, you're making money. But, the one thing is, Clayton hit the ball really well, but, we'd have the local yokels were criticizing us left and right. That was unfortunate, but, top tennis teachers would come and they would watch, we had people that learned to teach tennis that were, they were starting in their 40s. It was a career change. They were retiring from the military. So the strength of the individual comes out. I think that's a criticism for the GreatBase. People, we're talking about the foundation that Clayton had from a young age, is that the strength of the individual comes out. There's always individuality. But for me, it's just a big thank you. All the best to you and your family. Clayton, it was great to see you in San Antonio, 50 years old. That means I'm not 51. I'm exactly 20 years older. But no, your father, he not only helped me and helped the program, but all the people who went through that program, it was really your dad's support where we got to start with, because we had you, and then I know when you spoke to those people in San Antonio for us, we had one student and then we had two students. And the reason that they started working with us, here's a story, local story. Julie Scott, her name's come up. She's a Ferrari. She just can run and run and run and run like a deer. But at one time, she beat a girl by the name of Alyssa Kimmel, whose name came up. and it was, I think, Love and Love. And then some time went by, and then Lissa beat her Love and Love. And Gail Scott, I remember that the USTA came knocking and go, hey, we'd like to work with your child and have her come into Dallas for clinics. And she just said, we're fine. But that was a very special time. And again, if it wasn't the partnership, and it was just very innocent, it was just a story of circumstance. Your dad's out there hitting on the ball machine and said, hey, can I help you out with your forehand or backhand? And he said, yeah, you can, but I've got a kid who I'd like to really be able to play. And then he said, I want my kid to be really good. And, for a kid to play at the University of Texas, that's kind of a big deal. But so congratulations for that achievement and others. Guys?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Clayton. Why don't you wrap it up?
Thanks. I appreciate it. Everyone on the phone, had a big part of in my tennis, and known everyone for a long time, and I'm glad that I can help out in any way possible, and I'll go dust off the rackets a little bit. So I'm ready for Dave and to partner with him at Westwood, and then I'll also make sure we have to play each other in a cage match, I guess.
Well, I think one thing, if you're going to play doubles, you need to get in the weight room because you're going to have to carry him. Let's do this, Yvonne. Usually at the end of these, we rattle off some notes, but why don't we just we'll put down some show notes for the listeners to get a summary of this. And but guys, thanks for being part of our podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was always fun. And Clayton, great to talk to you. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, definitely. Next time I'm in Dallas, I'll come over to Brookhaven.
Yeah, come on out.
I just want to tell you, Clayton, when you turn 100, we'll do it again.
Definitely.
Clayton, all the best. Yeah, best wishes on your 50th.
I appreciate it, Richard. Good talking to you. It's been a while.
Richard, you should go down and coach him at Westwood.
Come on down, Richard. We'll have fun.
No, we need to connect, and
will do.
We need to connect. We've talked about having the alumni, the associates, and we should have a reunion. All the coaches, we should definitely do that. But it's been fun, guys.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Over and out. Good night.
Thank you, guys.
Listeners,
have a great night. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
All right, listeners, thanks for hanging in. Thanks, Clayton. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Yvonne. And another podcast in the books. Adios, amigos. But let's do that with the show notes. That's I'm sure there's a few key points you can write down.
Yeah, of course.
All right, good night. Over and out. Thanks.
Adios. See ya.